Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nasser Al-Batal. I've been in the IT industry for about 28 plus years now. Basically grew up in data centers and generally speaking in operation management services. I've done some application development for a number of years. Didn't like it very much. I went back to operation management services and best practices, and I got into ITIL about, I would say, close to 20 years ago. Been consulting, training, coaching globally in the subject matter for a lot of different type of organizations, from mom and pop shop to NASA and everything in between. This session is to introduce you to ITIL at a high level and to talk about some of the benefits, some of the critical success factors, some of the pitfalls associated with the framework, and how different organizations look at it. So basically, for those of you who are not familiar with what ITIL is, the term ITIL, the acronym ITIL, stands for Information Technology Infrastructure Library. The framework has been introduced in the, I would say, first half of the 80s, 1983, 84, where the first kind of discussions were started to, to be heard about ITIL. It was established by the UK government for the UK government at the time, and very quickly grew to become the de facto standard in IT service management globally. ITIL went through three major versions, three major, if you want to call it, reinventions, from function-based to process-based to what we have today as a service lifecycle-based framework. With that in mind, ITIL is, as I mentioned, owned in terms of intellectual property by the UK government, and they outsourced its governance and its certifications, exams, to a number of organizations over the years. The latest one is what we call AXELOS, AXELOS, and they are the one who actually manage the certifications and examination, and they subcontracted, that side of it to a number of organizations as well. One of them, which will be the only examination institute associated with ITIL as of January 2018, is called PeopleCert. So again, PeopleCert will be the only one able to issue exams, starting January 1st, 2018. So when we talk about ITIL in general, a lot of the questions, are around why ITIL. What are we going to do with ITIL? What is the benefit, of using ITIL, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the high-level benefits associated with the framework. First and utmost, it supports business drivers, it supports business strategies and business outcomes. So it transformed the strategy onto deliverables from an IT service management perspective. So if and when there is any sort of business change, whether you're growing by acquisition, or there is an innovative idea, or there is a change in the line of business or line of businesses, and so on and so forth, then ITIL and IT service management will enable that change from the perspective of operation management services and the IT processes associated with that. We certainly manage risk as part of the framework, and we keep an eye on it. We want to make sure that we show value for money on an ongoing basis, continual improvement is one of the critical success factor and one of the fundamentals in the ITIL framework. It's based on the dynamic cycle of improvement, you know, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, if anybody is familiar with that. And we'll see in a little bit, you know, what that means as well from an ITIL point of view. What you have on the screen are the 5 main areas or the 5 main phases of the ITIL framework. We start from the middle, the red bubble. We talk about service strategy. Service strategy will provide you the context, will provide you the focus in terms of everything that we are doing in IT service management. This is where we establish what set of services going to be useful to the business. How are we going to support and enable the business from an IT service perspective is defined in service strategy. So the vision, the outcome, the value, the financials, the demand, the business relationship, all those, you know, kind of processes are in service strategy. So once we figure out what services we're going to need to introduce, we provide, you know, the chartered services to service design, so that service design will actually architect the services, will make sure, as an example, that the service, the technology, the architecture, the measurement, the processes are all considered. Also, we make sure that our people, process partners, and products are available in effort to come up with the blueprint, as we call it, a service design package that will trigger the activities associated in service transition. Service transition, on the right-hand side, the first kind of orange bubble, is where you build, you test, you implement, is where you establish your controls for infrastructure and for what we call configuration item records. The configuration items are a reflection of anything and everything for which you want to control, whether it's a document or a box or a network or a service. Anything that you wish to control is under the hat of change management in service transition. It's considered to be what we call a configuration item. So once we build, we test, and we implement, you know, we're not just going to come in and kind of throw it over the fence, even though historically this is what was done in many different organizations. So, you know, we're gonna follow some of the DevOps hints, and we'll work with service operation to provide them what we call early life support in terms of troubleshooting criteria, in terms of user manuals and training, in terms of even performing the support activities until your service support team or teams are, you know, up and ready and able to do the delivery work for the new service or the modified service. So service operation is where all of these teams are. You notice the 4 gray boxes below that. These are the functional groups. So groups like the service desk or like third levels, you know, whether it's technical or operation or application management, that will basically receive incidents and problems and requests from the service desk in order to provide resolutions. Service operations basically will provide performance reports to what we call CSI. CSI stands for Continual Service Improvement. So based on how we're doing in service operation, then Continual Service Improvement will make sure that we are basically improving the quality of services, you know, over time. and eventually will establish a service improvement plan, to get the job done. So this is, at 50,000 feet, the different phases of what the ITIL framework is about. So you notice a little bit of colors, on those bubbles. The reason you have service transition and service operation in orange is to highlight that most organizations actually work, ITIL in those areas or in those phases. In other words, most organizations will have some sort of change management, and from change management they start building, and they basically throw it over the fence to service operation, and service operation will have to splash water to basically make it work. Most organizations are missing service strategy and service design, or they're putting very little emphasis on those phases. Most organizations are missing or have a little emphasis on continual service improvement as well. So you notice that most of the industry are mainly involving service transition and service operation when you talk to them about ITIL implementation. And this is why many organizations, many businesses are not really reaping the benefit of their ITIL implementation, because they either did not implement it properly, or they did implement it properly, but because of whatever constraints they have, whether financial, political, cultural, and so on, they end up doing more in transition and operation, and you find now discrepancies and misalignment. As an example, what services should we have to support the business, and when we establish those services are not the same services that are being transitioned or operated. So there is a disconnect between service strategy and service operation or service transition. Most services, are not even architected properly. In other words, when we're talking about architecture, there is a specific life cycle that you need to go through. Instead, many organizations jump into solution architecture rather than follow the architecture life cycle, right? So they miss 2-3 phases, and then they jump again from preparation and strategic thinking in enterprise architecture. They jump straight to the solution architecture and say, oh yeah, we're going to develop this Oracle solution for you, or we're going to develop this a cloud solution for you, or whatever the case may be. So this is why I'm showing you the orange kind of bubbles, to kind of show the big disconnect between it and the other phases. You notice, in service design and in CSI, there is kind of a evolution of coloring. This is just to show you the linkage. So the red, as an example, there is a link with service strategy. The green is specific to service design, but then it kind of transitions to orange. It shows you the link to service transition. And from service operation, there is a link in orange to CSI, just to show you kind of what's supposed to be the integrated approach that many organizations unfortunately don't follow, and yet they complain that ITIL may not be working. It's not ITIL that is not working, it's how you implemented ITIL that is not working. This is ITIL, as we call it, big picture. So you notice the phases in the black arrows, the 5 phases I just introduced to you: strategy, design, transition, operation, and improvement. And if you try to look at it, vertically under each one of these arrows, there is a number of different processes. And then the 4 pink boxes that shows the groups that I showed you here at the bottom, right? They're the same groups. Maybe I should change this color here from gray to pink so we can relate to it. But very quickly, I mean, I want to bring your attention again to the different processes that are established under each one of these phases. So you notice in strategy, we're talking about business relationship management, strategy management, portfolio management as an example. Without portfolio management, all you have is a service catalog. So you wouldn't really know what services are being strategized or being developed or being prepared. All you know is what you currently have, and that's what the document, the service catalog that is, usually documents. Also, you wouldn't know what services are going to be archived or decommissioned because you only have the catalog. And now we hope that the catalog that you do have actually, you know, is useful enough to reflect a proper image of what you currently have in your operation environment. This strategy, as I said, has to link or has to provide a major output to service design. We talk about it as service level package, or the set of services that's going to support and enable your business. And this is what design is taken, you know, and then architecting from there on. So there are two angles in service design. One angle talks about agreement related processes. So as an example, the service level management, the catalog management, the supplier management, all of those are agreements and or contracts supported by the catalog. And then you have what we call the technical, right, aspects, which are included in capacity, availability, continuity, security, you know, at that. And then you've got the maestro at the top of the list, as we call it, design coordinator. And design coordinator process is accountable to generate the service design package, that bottom orange box. That's an output from design to transition. So transition is waiting to get that service design package, otherwise they will not be doing anything contradictory to, you know, reality. In order for transition to start building, testing, deploying, and so on, you really need to know what the blueprint is going to look like, what the requirements are, whether technical requirement or functional requirements, non-functional requirements, managerial requirements, acceptance criteria, organizational readiness, your current status, you know, of your infrastructure baseline, and so on, all of which is in your service design package. So if you don't have that, what kind of services are you trying to introduce? So in transition, you have things like change management, asset and configuration management, knowledge management, transition planning, release and deployment, and then validation, testing, and change evaluation. So these processes, you know, will do a couple of things. Change and configuration management are what we call control processes. They control the baseline and they control the documentation associated with all your service assets. Transition planning is that mini project management that you are using to basically transform the service from a blueprint all the way to physical service. The knowledge management collect all the information to make it accessible to those who need to make decisions, and release and deployment is basically what you're going to do in effort to introduce the service to operation, or to push the service, as we say, out the door. So you notice when I talked about transition and operation, and I said that we are providing early life support, and you notice here there is kind of a redundancy, if you wish, or overlap to be more accurate, between transition and operation. This is because transition is performing the early life support activities, to support and enable operation. And in operation, of course, we have the traditional incident management, problem management, request fulfillment, event management, access management in terms of processes, but also we have all the functional groups that are in the pink, at the bottom of that phase. And finally, on the far right, this is where things become live and you follow on an ongoing basis the Deming cycle to continuously improve the maturity of your IT environment, as well the maturity of your services. You notice the green arrows as an example. Service level requirement is beginning to end, all the way to the point where we have a pilot. And once we sign off on the pilot, then you go live. So from pilot onward, there is no more changes in service level requirement. And all of these functional groups at the bottom in the pink boxes, these are all part of your project teams. So if need be, they are involved in design, in development, in building, in testing, and so on. They cover all the phases within the framework. The big brown tool at the bottom of the diagram is basically showing you that you will need some sort of integrated set of tools, or as we call it in the DevOps world, a tool chain of some sort to support all of these processes up above. You will need to have solid governance, and of course there will be some sort of intake process, from the business to IT. And this is also one of the challenge. Many organizations don't have an intake process in place, or there is a discrepancy, as an example, between change management gating and project management gating. So all of a sudden, especially when you have a number of different partners that you are working with, there is no, how should I say this, standardization of approach or processes, and thing becomes a spaghetti ball very quickly. So at a high level, this is what ITIL is about in terms of structure and processes. So this is just to show you that the portfolio that we talked about is broken into three main areas: pipeline, catalog, and retired. And the catalog includes business and technical services views, which will be used, right, by all of your business units in terms of services, especially the business services. The technical services, this is more internal, right? So it's really not customer oriented. The customer oriented is the business service. So all of these different business units will be using this. And of course, you should have a service level agreement between you as a provider and all of your customers in this case. And you should have what we call a business relationship managers to ensure that you are collecting requirements and making the customer happy, throughout. Also, you need to make sure that there is an internal agreement between your functional groups, and that's what you see on the right-hand side, OLA, for operational level agreement. So in other words, when the service desk escalates to any of the other functional groups, how long would it take for them to provide their services back? If nothing is established, well, we're going into chaos again. So something to keep in mind. So some of the benefits that you're gonna capture as a result of implementing ITIL is increase in the maturity of services, in the maturity of processes, in the maturity of your IT organization, and therefore in the maturity of your business. And anybody who's familiar with capability maturity model integration, basically we have 5 levels. Those are the measurement scales, you know, that we tap into to figure out where you are as an organization. Are you at the initial level, or at the chaotic level, or you are at a defined or managed or optimized level? Each one of those, of course, has, you know, more and more benefit until you reach level 5. So what that means, if you are at level 4 and at level 5, that now you have cost saving, now you follow the lean approach, now there is enough information to enable you to make decisions, now you are supporting and you're enabling the business properly, now you have ownership and documentation and management and measurements and so on, right? So you really have a good command of your IT service management environment. To get there, to get to that level of maturity, I mean, ignore the timing here, the 3 to 6 months or 2 to 5 years, because really this is highly dependent on numerous factors, and some of these factors are associated, as an example, with the size and complexity of the organization, the type of organization, you know, what other practices, best practices, or internal proprietary practices that you use or follow. So there are a number of variables that will affect the amount of implementation time and or the amount of assessment time. So first and utmost, you need to figure out, what is your vision? What is your vision, and how does it align with the business strategy? And then figure out where you are. What is your current situation? You need also to figure out where you want to be, or your desired state. And then, you know, once you do that, you have created a gap between where you are and where you want to be. You discovered a gap. And so how are you going to bridge the gap? How are you going to get there? So the gap could be associated with people, with processes, with tools, with standards, with a number of things, any of them or all of them or some of them. So once you figure out the gap, you need to also figure out your roadmap. And your roadmap will include milestones to be reached. And from there on, you need to keep the momentum going so that you're able to actually do this in an iterative way, so that, you know, you mitigate the risk, you mitigate the costs, you mitigate any sort of duplication, right? And you make sure that you actually are performing IT service management in a mature environment. So this goes on and on until you actually reach the goal. And even when you do reach the goal, you still need to continue to sustain the level of maturity that you have established. Areas that potentially going to be affecting, you know, or affected by the implementation. Your process is going to be affected. How you manage, you know, your services, how you manage your operation, how you manage your IT organization altogether is going to be affected. Your technology is going to be affected. Your people going to be affected. So throughout, you are actually undertaking a considerable amount of change when you are implementing ITIL, right, in any organization. And this is not going to happen a big bang type of thing tomorrow. This is going to be what I call an increment approach, a phased approach, a planned approach, so that you minimize, you know, number one, the adverse impact on the organization, you minimize the risk, right? You minimize deviation from strategy, and you will have the ability to revisit or to reiterate if and when things don't align the way you were hoping for them to align. So this is actually, you know, a sort of business transformation, you know, for your IT organization, and it has to support your business outcome. Otherwise, it just does not make sense to go through it. Today, the current scheme of the ITIL certification is basically what you have on the screen. Anyone that would like to become either a practitioner or an expert or a master in ITIL must take the ITIL Foundation as the entry point. This is going to be the prerequisite for anything above it. There is today a certification we call ITIL Practitioner, which is a combination of foundation and continual service improvement. It's more of a kind of hands-on than only theoretical. And then you have the intermediate life cycle and or the intermediate capability. So now you can take either path, you know, the blue path or the red path, plus managing the life cycle to become an ITIL expert. So ITIL expert itself is a collection of 22 credits. There is no sitting for that level. ITIL master is similar to a university master level, where you're going to have, you know, a paper and interviews and discussion of a project that you have implemented or you are implementing. The process takes about 8 months and it costs a bucket of money. And there's only kind of I would say, handful of people, you know, globally with that. For those who are involved in ITIL day in and day out, you really don't need that unless if you want to go out and write a book, or you want to go out and manage a global program of some sort. Then you want to show credentials, then you do the ITIL master. So in a nutshell, this is the certification scheme. And of course, for training, you communicate with Paul and his folks, and they will be more than happy to provide you all the details about, you know, any of these certification levels, you know, if you wish to undertake, you know, such a training. These are kind of I put them together because a lot of organizations kind of confused in terms of what kind of roles and responsibilities, you know, we should have, and what kind of certifications these roles, you know, should have. So you notice at the top, you know, we have the sampled roles. I mean, it's impossible to kind of capture all the roles that are available in the market. So these are examples. And on the right side, you have, if you take the life cycle, what kind of certifications you need at that role. If you take capability, what kind of certifications you need at that role, plus whether you need managing across the life cycle or not. And of course, there are some, you know, additional associated with each one of the phases. So this one earlier, this is for service strategy, for service design, as an example, for service transition, and so on, right? You can certainly, if anybody is interested, we can share the PDF file of the presentation with you. And oops, and I wanted to see if anybody has any questions, but it took us to, you know, anyway, any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. Anyone has any questions that I can answer for you? One last note before we call it off, so since there are no questions. If you are one of the decision makers in terms of deciding and or implementing on an ITIL implementation, you have to keep in mind that ITIL alone, is not going to give you the business outcome that you're looking for. ITIL is a piece of the puzzle, right? So don't expect that ITIL is going to provide you all the answers. As an example, ITIL does governance, but ITIL is not a governance framework. See what I mean? ITIL does not do or support guidance on application development. So you need to follow, as an example, application development lifecycle. ITIL supports DevOps, but ITIL itself is not DevOps. So something to keep in mind as well. All right. So just to leave you with that point. Any questions, Paul, that I can answer on your side?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just a question. Do you see in the field a lot of integration with ITIL and other types of industry standards and governance policies, governance guidance like FFIEC, COBIT, COSO? Do you see a lot of integration needing to be established in order to make your ITIL planning work effectively?
Actually, let me, there is, I don't have the other deck. I wanted to show you something, but yes, to make a long story short, absolutely. Most of the time, what happens is that before you start any sort of implementation, you need to figure out what your business goals and objectives are, and whether you're going to need governance or not, whether you are required to align with regulatory requirements of some sort, whether COSO or SOX or some international standard or quality management standard. You need to figure out, right, what is your business outcome is going to be, and based on that, then you can create what I call your own framework. So you take ITIL and you inject ITIL as an example with COBIT for governance and control, and with SOX for financial and for security, and with DevOps for, as an example, continuous deployment or deployment pipeline, continuous testing, continuous I lost the term there, continuous development, etc. So absolutely, you need to figure out, what is it that you want to accomplish, and then you can take ITIL and you say, okay, ITIL is going to provide me all of these things, excellent, and now I need to plug in some additional, aspects to it to get to where I want. I noticed that there was a quick question, I believe, that went through asking if you can introduce it in partially or something in that respect. The question is, what benefits are you going to get from doing that? All right. You can implement it whichever way you want to implement it, but at the end of the day, really, you have to figure out if you are reaping the benefit of the framework or not. As I mentioned, and I mean, we still have the presentation open. Let me show you here. This is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. So you may have, as an example, organizations that focus on these type of areas. So what happens for design? What happens for strategy? So you jump to to controlling and to building and to testing, but you really don't know, right? supporting or enabling what? So it's very important to, I mean, the framework is established this way for a reason. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do 28 processes and functions, right? You can pick and choose. I mean, it has to be meaningful, right? Pick and choose the processes that you are interested in, but not just ignore phases, or ignore portions of the framework altogether. Then you're not going to get the benefit that you're looking for. Any other questions that I can answer for you? Very good. So with that, we conclude the session. Paul, it's over to you.
Trying to speak, but couldn't. Appreciate everyone's time, and we'll get
the phase that includes those processes that I shared with you earlier, unless if you mean something different with transition management.
Okay, Nasser, can you hear me?
All right. So thank you all for your attention. We appreciate it. Again, Starweaver can provide you any information that you may require on the training aspect of it. So feel free to communicate with Paul, and he'll get back to you on all of this.